the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behaviors so you won't click. No complicated code, just tried and true brain science at play. Social engineering for good, the best defense is in your mind today.
Welcome to Phishing for Answers. The opinions expressed here are solely those of the individuals involved and do not reflect the views of their employers. Get ready, because the next live episode of Phishing for Answers is starting right now with your host, Joshua Crumbaugh, the CEO of Fish Firewall.
Psychology is the new firewall, where human insight trumps every trick. We're not hacking systems, we're hacking behavior so you won't click.
All right. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today, I'm here with Denise Crisler. She is head of security awareness over at Danaher. Denise, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, hi. Thanks, Joshua. Yep. I am reside in Florida, kind of arming our Danaher workforce with security culture awareness and training best practices. I'm really excited to be here and look forward to this discussion today.
So how'd you get into cybersecurity in the first place?
That's a great question because no one really has a direct path. I probably about 8-9 years ago, where I come from, maybe more of an HR background with learning and development, succession planning, talent development, and learned more about what was at the time a newly added high trust requirement around learning deliverables and communication efforts. And a individual who worked with previously said, hey, we kind of need your skill set. We're not really sure what this area looks like. And really the rest has been history. I've been in this gig ever since.
Well, that's very cool. So you've been in the security awareness side of it your entire career. Interesting. So that's actually something that is relatively unique. Most people, at least in my experience, have started in some area of technical or something like that, or tend to be a little bit more technical. So when it comes to, well, no, I like it because the human element is the most misunderstood aspect of cybersecurity, in my opinion. It's
Agree.
one of the areas where I really think that we are winging it as an industry, if you will. And when you look at frameworks, they don't really tell you how to do any of this. They just tell you that you have to do it. And so, I mean, that's part of the reason for this podcast, right? Is to discuss how do we actually impact change. And so that's a compliment. Don't take that the wrong way.
Oh, no, I
Um,
definitely think it's a compliment. I think we oftentimes have to really understand learning and development in order to ensure we're having measurable training. And that's not necessarily, diving into the technical aspects of the learning, but it's how we are implementing adult learning principles. So I applaud others out there who are trying to embark in this area who can appreciate those.
well, it's certainly not something that is super easy. I think there's a lot of behavioral science to it. So what are some of the best, best practices that you've learned along the way, or maybe some tips that you might have for people if they're building out a program?
Gosh, I really think you have to first do an analysis of where your audience is at. So, don't start at a higher level if you're understanding that the learning need is really at a real foundational level. So from our awareness efforts, we are communicating through newsletters, through SharePoint and intranet pages, and everything we can do to try to drive that engagement, but really break it down so people have a better understanding of these best practices. Another thing that I strive for is when we're looking at training, we're calling training, and we want to really measure learning as our ultimate goal. So a
Good
little
point.
joke around the type of quality of learning, and that we're measuring that through performance-based objectives. We don't want to throw YouTube up there and thinking somebody's going to watch a YouTube on surgery and then they would be able to perform that surgery right on you the next day. We really want to understand the learning deliverable, and
I
that
know
people
some
have,
people that might try that actually.
yes, yes, I've had a lot of
Hopefully
good
not
conversations
surgery, but,
about
I
it.
know some people that swear by YouTube. You can learn anything on there. They say it, so I don't know.
You sure can, and you can know it and know of it, but can you practice or apply it? And that's a different level. So, when I'm looking at some best practices around phishing awareness, we can share the video and people know what they should be doing, but how do we implement the ability to do it is a different ball game.
Agreed. Well, I think that's actually a good discussion point is what do we measure? What are the most critical KPIs inside of a security awareness program?
Well, how much time do we have? I mean, I really there's a lot of opportunity around looking at role-based learnings. Having a conversation earlier today about insider threat and what we need to do to arm the workforce around those different things. And I think what is also something to consider is understanding there would be a whole curriculum of learning for an individual. It's not thinking one training would accomplish everything. Everything in the kitchen sink is in this learning. We've got this request from this group, that group. And I really think adult learning principles suggests micro learning anyway. So we're going to chunk
Yes.
it into palatable learning opportunities and then wrap it into a nice little, curriculum or curriculum map. And then people can, digest that at an easier rate, I think.
So, this my anthem has been for a long time, we need to bring marketing into cybersecurity, and it's exactly that. When we overcomplicate it or we try to cover 25 different topics at once, which I've seen a lot of security programs do. I mean, even your best listeners that pay attention and hang on to every word, they're still only gonna catch maybe 80%, 70% if we're lucky. And so you've got a lot being missed there right out of the gate. They've studies have shown and demonstrated that with binge training, it's just ineffective. And I think the best example there is Netflix. We have all, had a lazy weekend or when we were sick or whatever, where we binge watched a show. And what's interesting is if you ask somebody about that show, the very next day, they can't answer a whole lot of questions about it because even when it's something we really enjoy, like our favorite television show, retain very little when we binge. And that's the reason, to your point, it has to be bite-sized. It only needs to be really one thing at a time, and it does need to be to that person, and I love the example of, think or hovering before you click, because that's great advice to the average office employee, but to somebody that is only ever checking their email from a cell phone, that's actually bad advice. And so I think under having that understanding and tailoring it to them, is equally as critical there. Um,
Definitely agree.
so, along those lines, what are some of the top things that you think we should be educating everybody about?
We can't get enough of phishing, right? But there's just multiple ways, like you're suggesting, to get that messaging out. So, phishing education, phishing awareness, and all the types of phishing. It's not just email anymore. We're
Yeah.
seeing Teams and QR codes and all different opportunities. So, the more we can just have people familiar with the best practices around any type, wherever it's coming from, the better. And then I think another thing to consider too is really bridging the gap between the cybersecurity team and the rest of the organization. That we are really here to help. So when in doubt, reach out. If you're not sure if this is legit, the time that we can minimize from the time the individual receives it to when they actually engage with our cyber team is a win too. That's another metric to consider. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's arming people with the knowledge on how do they engage the cybersecurity team, as well as just providing a plethora of here's resources, micro learning, SharePoint pages, newsletters, videos, however people are retaining that information. And we have to think of the generations, the multi generations, and how they want to receive information too.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think that's part of the reason that we need to integrate our cybersecurity messaging into everything.
yeah.
Newsletters are great, but to me, pay stubs are better. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot of anything really complex. It can be just stay cyber aware, protect your paycheck. But I think the more places we can integrate, to your point, the more effective it is, because just because one person is going to read that newsletter doesn't mean that the next person will. And so the more places we hit them, whether it's a poster in the hallway, a
Yeah.
video in the elevator, or a note on their pay stub, to me, all of those things really do make a cultural difference and help to ultimately keep security front of mind, which is our goal.
Yes, great. We at Danaher have recently changed our, or I should say, slightly tweaked our security motto. We originally were security is everyone's responsibility, but have changed it in 2024 to security is your responsibility, for that same point, Joshua, that
I like
really if
that.
it's everyone's responsibility, somebody else will take care of it. But if it's your responsibility, you have that personal ownership to it. And we launched that during our Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October.
No, I mean, it makes perfect sense, because when it's everybody's, it's somebody else's responsibility.
Right.
But when it's it really does bring that home, doesn't it? And I think to that, so let's talk about role-based training. Um, One study that I saw said that when you can make the training contextual to somebody's role, that you actually get a 15x improvement on retention. And it actually made a lot of sense, because I think a lot of times, in particular with cybersecurity, people look at it as something that's too technical to understand, maybe something that only a genius could understand, because of the way that Hollywood portrays it. And so I do wonder if sometimes people are intimidated, and if, just simplifying it can help to minimize that.
Absolutely agree. We are really looking to build people's confidence. I think that's where the behavior change is going to happen. They have to know of it, they have to have the ability to do it, and then they have to be confident in it, right? So that they can even speak about it. And how do we go about doing that? Again, the bite-sized chunks, but breaking it down. I'm also a fan of trying to incorporate it in multiple blended learning solutions, but also languages. We're a global organization, so we're going to target people across the world and in whatever
Mhm.
language they prefer. And we definitely strive to diversify our learning deliverables to meet that need. But role-based learnings, if an individual can not only see how it will impact and improve their performance in their current role, another thing I've done is tried to talk to the individual about what their next step is. What is the next role they're looking for? And then people can see that career mapping and that career plan by acquiring these new knowledge, skills, and abilities.
That makes sense. Makes perfect sense. So along those lines of tailoring it to the individual, what are your opinions on role-based phishing? So to me, it's one of those things that I don't see a whole lot of it being done and for training purposes, but I do see it every single day in the wild.
Mhm.
And in particular, targeting our finance teams. It's more our finance teams, and I think our developers being targeted than anyone else. But they're two pretty at risk groups, and I don't know about you, but those are either one of those teams getting compromised absolutely keeps me up at night.
No, I'm actually an advocate of phishing role-based learning. So we're going to be rolling that out at Danaher this year and excited for that. That's new for us. And really, it's just not necessarily targeting, but really specifying a phishing attack that replicates what we're seeing in the environment to support these individuals having a learning experience. As that's ultimately what security culture awareness is training is trying to do. We're not trying to trick anyone. We're just trying to give them more experiences in a safe environment, you know,
Hmm.
to either ask questions about what they may have missed or ensure their confidence is there to pinpoint what the issue was.
I think that's a really good point. We're not trying to trick anyone. I think too often phishing is seen as I need to make it the most complex thing ever and trick everybody. I'm on your side of this. I don't think we should be trying to trick our users. I think it is far more effective to catch them doing things right and encourage that, which means slowly ramp it up. Make it easy to spot the first fish. And when they report it, congratulate them, compliment them, tell them they're a hero. But those things like that to me are far better at driving that culture than the opposite of that and tricking people and slapping them on the wrist, if you will, or slapping them on the hand and saying, "Hey, you messed up." I want to catch people doing it right way more than I want to catch people doing it wrong.
Absolutely. Yes, from our own even professional value standpoint, I would not work for an organization who had the wall of shame. I really am trying to get the word out on the street over the importance of supporting people where they are, and any incremental progress we make towards that is a win. And it's getting people more comfortable. And then, like you just said, once they are changing the behavior, then they feel better about what they're doing to protect the organization against
Yeah.
security issues, I should say. And I also think it's a great win when people go home and tell the family about it. So, here's what I learned, by the way, check this out, or just a heads up on this.
I
But
like to give them homework and tell them to
yeah,
go take it home to their family because when they do, it's a really cool thing that happens. They become the expert at home, and when they
yes,
become the expert at home, it just changes their mindset altogether at work.
yes, absolutely.
So I couldn't agree more. Um, okay, so let's talk about carrot versus stick because I think that is one of those areas in this industry that is still heavily debated. You've got some of the biggest influencers in security awareness still saying, hey, use the stick to change behavior. What's your thought on
Oh, well, it's not a black and white issue for me. There's all gray in the middle there because I want to talk about the stick. What does the stick mean? Is it the first time somebody clicks on a phishing simulation, it's put in their employee file? Or is the stick really kind of arming the organization to understand that the defined expectations are out there, and therefore they've gone against something that they hear quite often? And what I mean by that is, are we getting the messaging out? Hey, we do these phishing simulations to support you. We want you to pause each time you're receiving messaging from email or Teams or something. And we've driven that cultural change. And then if there's still somebody who's clicking for more times, well, they need the additional support. So the stick is the support, is what I'm viewing it as.
Yeah. Well, and I think there can be some really light sticks that maybe the employee hopefully doesn't even notice, and if they do, they're not that big of a deal. And to that, I think we can tighten controls around that employee that clicked on Forfish. They are way more at risk of getting malware on their computer than anyone else,
Right.
right? And so we can have their computer a little bit more hardened. We can have them on an isolated VLAN. We can restrict those people's access. And I do think there are some things like that that we absolutely have to do. I mean, I've got a lot of government clients that
Oh, yeah.
have a percentage of their population that check their email once a year when they're forced to do their training, and they have to shut off their account once a year to get them to come in and do their training. So I do see that there is some need for a stick,
Mhm.
but I think it's taken overboard. Like we were talking before the program about the 3 strikes and you're out policy. Um, what's your opinion on something like that?
So when we're saying out, I think it's really defining what the out is. I think we're at a point where if we have somebody consistently clicking and talking about the leveling of the phishing simulation, we at Danaher have ramped up the difficulty level. We've done that intentionally over the past year. And if we have an individual who's clicking 3 or more times in a 6-month period, we are, wanting them to take additional training. It's again just to support their learning. If they're out, I don't think that's really going to bring a benefit to the organization. If we've shut off the system, they don't have access to it. They are posing as a liability, so we need to do something. Perhaps we're engaging their leader as well. A conversation could be had with, cybersecurity, the individual themselves, and their direct manager, just to kind of nurture what we were looking for the changes to be.
So more directly though, what do you think about the if you click on 3 fish, you're gonna be fired approach?
I think we would we'd open ourselves up to some problems legally, but I also think there would be quite a reduction in the workforce. There's a lot of opportunity with a phishing simulation to have that subjectivity too around whether this was a click or not, or did this happen in certain ways. I think I'd be rather leery of such a punitive
Oh,
um,
I
recourse.
I'm very against the 3 strikes and you're out policy, by the way. I do still hear about it from time to time. It still exists. There are companies that are using it. You mentioned one, I mentioned one before, the 2 very well-known names, actually before, the program, that are still both doing this. But I do think there's a risk with any phishing simulations that if you make your response to clicking too punitive, if you make the approaches too just tricky, and you don't take the approach of trying to catch them doing it right and building them up.
Right.
I've also seen it have a serious impact on productivity, where
Mhm.
people are afraid of their email. They're not opening it because they'd rather miss an email than get fired for clicking on a
Right.
fish. And I worry that if you get too punitive, that it could have a negative impact overall on the entire organization,
Agree.
from creativity or hitting creativity and making people less creative over to just making them less likely to report risk.
I mean, I think it's fair to say cybersecurity team members are really just trying to make life easier for the rest of the organization. So when we're looking at putting things in place that's making it harder, it's really contradictive to ultimately we're trying to put measures in place, controls in place so that we protect the environment, which enables far more productivity and sales
Yeah.
ultimately. And that's really what we want.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And ideally those controls are rather invisible. Very visible if you're an outsider, but if you're an insider, easy to get in, easy to gain access to what you need to do your job. And so I do think there's a little bit of a balancing act, and least privilege model certainly makes that difficult sometimes. Uh,
Right.
but but to that point, I mean, I do think that how we go about doing things inside of our programs makes all the difference in the world, whether it's fishing or training. And to that, maybe let's talk a little bit about methodology on fishing. What are some of your tactics? What are some of the rules that you run fishing simulations by?
So you mean the criteria around which ones we select for to send out?
Whether it's what you're selecting, what happens after they click, uh,
Mhm.
any aspect of it, the frequency.
Sure. Well, I think I've learned over the years it's important to engage the other parts of the business on the phishing simulations. I had one example when we were going to run one on some work from home best practices. And thank goodness the HR team informed me that there was some challenges right now over implementing a return back into the office environment. And that might not be the best phishing simulation to run. So I really think engaging others is important. We've recently implemented if an individual clicks 2 or more times, they have a 5 to 10 minute learning assigned to them within the LMS. And it just, again, gives some supportive information and education to help that individual. And then fun things is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I always call that my Super Bowl. And
My it
it
feels like
does.
it. There's so
It
much work
does.
you have to do. I mean, it's like the
Sure.
whole year leads up to October, and then October's gone like that.
It doesn't feel like that in October, though, Joshua.
No,
It's
it
a
doesn't.
great opportunity and to bring a lot of awareness in. We partner with other parts of the team, the risk management team, other areas who want to jump in, roll up their sleeves and help out. But it's fun, and phishing is always a topic. And then it's also where we can introduce that we've constructed a SharePoint page where we have all the previous phishing simulations and what we call like the red flags. And we
Oh,
get those
cool.
messaging out there like you can go back. You remember when you got this email? This is what you could have been looking for. There's a lot of resources, and we can roll those out in our Super Bowl.
Yeah, we send out those notices the second somebody clicks, but I love having the dictionary. I had never thought of, like, having that just as an available resource, like, on
Yeah,
SharePoint where they can go look at it. Um, Very cool. I actually, I think that that's a great resource because one of the biggest things about protecting users from phishing is helping them realize that it's the really simple stuff and helping them gain that confidence. And I think that's part of the reason that we run those simulations because when they go through the simulation and whether they click or they don't click, it helps them understand how these things work, and it helps them realize that urgency is always a red flag. That if the CEO is writing you and the CEO never writes you, that's a red flag. If the
great.
CEO is asking for gift cards, that's a bright red flag.
Mhm.
But I mean, these things happen, and I think for a lot of people, they're blinded, and that's the whole goal of social engineering is to blind you to security threats until it's too late. And most people, the second it's over, they're like, "Oh, I knew better than that." Well, there's a reason that the psychology works, and I think that's part of the reason we gotta make people aware of their own biases that exist within them.
Agree.
Okay.
And I think we're ultimately trying to reduce the risk too, right? Because now with AI, we all know that the phishing attacks are getting more sophisticated. They're more realistic. Let's throw in deep fakes now. We've all heard about that in the news.
I mean,
Just
and we're starting to see them. I've talked
we
to,
are.
a few CIOs and quite a few CISOs that have already seen deepfakes targeting their organizations. It's
Yeah. I mean, that in itself. No one's going to be perfect at identifying a phishing attack, but we are ultimately just trying to reduce the attacks that impact the organization. That's really the messaging I want to get out. No one's going to be perfect with it, but we strive to try to identify the red flags at the best we can. But if I was to receive a deep fake from my CISO, with him asking me for something. I mean, if it's realistic enough, and I've seen some that are, it is really challenging, even for someone like me.
yeah, that's part of the reason I think that the number one bit of advice has to be trust your gut. And we have to train people on how to use their gut. My hypothesis is this. Our subconscious is our body's natural defense mechanism. Something flies at your face, your eyes automatically shut. Your arm automatically comes up to block it. These
Yeah.
reflexes, I think, can be honed to help us with cyber threats too. where you get that reflexive reaction the second you see urgency or the second you see authority being used against you. And to me, I feel like that's how we battle deepfakes. That and a good old fashioned process and procedure. This is never going to happen unless we follow this process. I really think it's going to be the low tech because I see all of these new startups out there. Hey, we can detect deep fakes. Okay, sure, you can today, but will you be able to 6 months from now? And that's the part I'm not convinced on, and the reason that I don't have a lot of hope for those types of technology.
Couldn't agree with you more. They're just becoming more sophisticated. And again, we just keep trying to identify the different elements. In an AI video, you might see something with the hands or whatever that just looks inconsistent, but do the best.
Agreed. So you mentioned earlier that you tell your users you're going to fish them ahead of time. Is that correct?
No, we definitely engage other departments to collaborate on the phishing simulation we're going to select, but there is an expectation across the business they will receive one a month. So I think that's
Okay,
no.
so they know it's coming. Well, I asked because one of the topics that I like to cover is gamification. And I think that to me, one of the ways you can gamify is just telling people you're gonna fish them and making a game out of it. "Hey, we're gonna fish you. It's your job to spot it, and, you get extra kudos if you report it," something like that.
Absolutely.
To me, I think that gamification can help, but I also think that sometimes it's taken a little too far and that, most grown adults don't want a gold star or don't care about a gold star anyways.
I try to
I mean, what
couple
are
it
your thoughts
with
on gamification?
Yeah, I try to couple. I've done it before where it's more of a team environment. So think of it like the Harry Potter Triwizard Tournament. So we're all got the house cup we're shooting for, and within the different departments, how many people reported the phishing
I like
simulation
that.
and kind of celebrated the team, not necessarily
Instead of a wall
specifically.
of shame, a wall of fame.
Yeah,
A
but from a
and I
team
like that. I mean,
perspective,
all the
yeah,
negatives can be flipped into positives for the most part too.
absolutely, absolutely.
And I think, I don't even remember who it was, so I can't give them credit, unfortunately. But one of the guests on the show was talking about how they were doing, a fishing tournament, and since then, we've shamelessly ripped it off, and we encourage and help our clients do fishing tournaments. But I find it as a really cool way of doing it, and all you do is you push your different departments to report, and you pin them against each other, and whatever
Yep.
department has the highest report rate wins the tournament. Um, I think things like that are fun, and the pun aspect of it, I think, just makes it that much more engaging for users.
Yes. And if the word is out on the street more around how this was a fun environment, or it's safe to try to report things to. I mean, ultimately, all these behavioral change is a win for all of us. As opposed to maybe where I've had an experience where I ran a phishing simulation one time for a free lunch, and had some people pretty upset with me. Teams lit up, and when they realized there wasn't actually a free lunch, I had some messaging. I mean, my CISO loved it at the time. He was thinking any PR is great, and I was like, well, I'm having to definitely work the teams and emails and try to help support the education around it. But
I
it
I
was
had somebody
fun.
on this show last week at Christmas time. Their InfoSec team decided to run a free honey baked ham dish. And same sort of thing, it blew up.
Yeah.
Well, so that year at the Christmas party, all of the InfoSec people had to, wear shirts, their CISO's idea, that said, "Ask me about the free honey baked ham," making a joke
That's
out of it,
great.
and so, like, everyone's coming up to him, taking pictures with them.
I love it.
Um, but I mean, I think we almost have to laugh at ourselves a little bit, and from the user's perspective, I understand how they would get, frustrated, but the bad guys do use those tactics, and it's better for
Yes.
us to use them first, than for the bad guys to use them and for us to get compromised as a result.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but egos are involved. And what I mean by that is we really want to build people's confidence, not only in phishing attacks, but anything around cybersecurity. We cybersecurity professionals get caught up and everyone knows what we're talking about. And we start speaking acronyms and whatnot. We have to pause that sometime and really break it down so that people understand the reasoning why we're trying to arm and increase our security posture across the organization, as well as just make it so that it becomes second nature. We're not going to do that by speaking another language, talking over people's heads. We want to be able to break it down so everyone's comfortable with it.
Oh, I agree completely, and I think if your training is talking about all of the rules and regulations, you miss the point. It really needs to just be the simple. Pressed the button and muted myself on accident because I'm moving my arms here. But it really needs to be those simple, basic, tips that they learn, and it has to be across all areas. And so, yeah, that too complex of training is always going to me, fall on deaf ears. In fact, there's been a lot of academic studies recently that have gone and looked at, traditional training and even some of the more, I'd say modern short form that's not really that short, like the 5 to 15-minute, videos. And it's finding that there is little to no, impact whatsoever on phishing susceptibility. And so, I think that that tells us a lot about our
Right.
approach and how making it bite-sized, making it very easy to understand, simplifying it as much as we can, that makes us make the whole thing more approachable to the average user who is probably intimidated by cybersecurity. I mean, I see even people in cyber, if you start talking about encryption and different ciphers, even cybersecurity people will turn off because it gets technical. And so I think that's a good example for us professionals even as to, what cybersecurity sounds like to the average person.
Oh, yeah. And I love that. And on that same note, we want to make sure that real technical information is also being given to our cybersecurity professionals. So there's the role based learnings to meet
Mhm.
compliance or behavioral change efforts, but there's also our own cybersecurity talent that we need to nurture. I mean, threats are changing, evolving every day. So, how do we
Yeah.
ensure that they're getting the resources and the new knowledge and they're staying ahead of the game? That's a real other area to focus on. I refer to it as growth and development. We really want them to have the resources that they need to continue to prepare the organization and protect the organization against things that just change daily.
Yeah, well, and developers too. I think
Yep.
that they both play a very critical role, and IT people, they all have these different elements where you do need that more technical training. Speaking of the defenders, I look at our efforts to stay on top of MITRE attack framework training. And we're endlessly creating videos. We cannot stay on top of it no matter
Yep.
what we do because it moves and it changes so quickly. And I think that's a really good example and highlight of why, as professionals, we've got to stay on top of the latest tactics. It changes daily, and right now, AI has caused it to change quicker than it
Right.
ever did before. Speaking of AI, what are you thinking about in terms of awareness training? AI definitely changes what we've got to be talking to the user about.
You know what? If I had a dollar for every time someone drops AI throughout my workday, I mean, it's everywhere, right? And I think we're looking at I go back to the learning objectives. So there's the learning objectives that need to be identified for the general mass, like what everyone needs to know about using Copilot and not using the free Chat GPT. There's kind of that general information
Don't
around AI.
use DeepSeek.
Oh, goodness, yes.
Did you
And
hear that that was all the user data was stored in an open bucket? And so when everyone flooded to it, some security researcher finds the open bucket, and they just had
oh,
everyone searches.
yikes, that's another thing to keep me up at night, Joshua. Thanks for the story. But then we also talk about our developers, like you said, and what are the learning objectives we need them to know are very different than what we're talking about with the general masses. They would get the general mass one. They would understand that, Copilot and Safe GPT, or sorry, Chat GPT. But our developers are going to be writing the content and the code, and we want to make sure they're armed with some best practices so that's another tier of it. And go back
Yeah,
to what we said at the beginning of this podcast. We want to make sure we're not trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink into an AI curriculum. We're really wanting to identify the specific targeted audience, what learning objectives we're looking for that group of people, and then back to the adult learning principles around micro learning and chunking it so it's more palatable and, like you said earlier, retained.
yeah. And I mean, that is the foundation of marketing when you think about it. Look at Coca-Cola. Their ads are 5 to 10 seconds long. They're simple. They're just
Yeah,
trying to get us to remember their name. And while we can never get cybersecurity as simple as Coca-Cola ads, I think it's a really good example of what we should be aiming for.
yeah,
Simple, easy to understand, hopefully memorable and entertaining if we can make it that way. I mean,
absolutely.
my shortest video is 8 seconds long. There isn't a single word in it whatsoever. It just has the caption on the screen that says, "The security team when I report a phishing email." It has a picture of the button, and then it's got Joe Rogan and somebody else, but that famous one where they're just freaking out, celebrating, and getting all excited, and that's it. And I think we can use more of that viral type content to make things more engaging without having to, to make it more entertaining. And it doesn't always have to be so complex where we have a lot of words or a big message.
Agreed.
If we're simplifying it, you ought to be able to say it in very few words.
Right. Engagement is key. Engagement from even our workforce, and we at Danaher have even been prioritizing kind of how our talent feels around engagement. And so they're hearing that. And then we can talk about engagement within cybersecurity through security awareness and training efforts too. And gone are the days or the, off the shelf learnings that, go on about, here's what you shall do. And, we really need to implement some different measures.
Well, it's not gone. They still have it in the DoD. You get to help
Gone
out
at
with
Danaher,
that.
I'll tell you. I won't allow that anymore. But
Oh, man, I hated those, I dreaded it. I mean, and what's funny is I've always had a passion for security awareness, so even when I worked for the government and I still had this passion, I'd built security awareness training, I'd done it for all kinds of companies before I went into this role, and then I get there and I'm like, "Oh god, this is terrible, I hate it," and I would literally dread it and put it off each year until they would threaten to turn off my account if I didn't do the training. I'm like, "Okay, it's fine. I guess it's time to do it." So I don't know. I've been one of those users before, but I do think that that goes to, just to what we've been talking about. Even the cybersecurity professionals will get bored with it if we don't try and if we don't make it entertaining. And so I do think that when we're focusing on training, one of those key factors has to be entertainment.
yes,
It
yeah,
doesn't have to be necessarily funny, but something to make it engaging. I love to tell stories because stories make it more entertaining, even if it's not a funny ending.
in one former organization, I had a kind of a hey bartender event where everyone could bring the ingredients for a mocktail or a cocktail, and we were going to talk about fishing. So we had
Okay.
more engagement on that particular event because it was just going to be, in the evening, and people were having a lot of fun. They were learning not only about fishing, they were learning a new cocktail. And you have to meet people where they're at. And
Yeah,
I think that's just really important.
agreed. Okay, so we are almost out of time here. Before we wrap up, do you have any uh well, we haven't even talked about the shortage, the labor shortage. I guess let's talk about that real quickly.
Sure.
Okay. We've got a huge shortage in cybersecurity. I know you want to talk a little bit about it. I'll pass it to you.
Sure. I think, we've identified across the industry that we have a talent shortage, and we want to not only break these things down for people to understand best practices in cybersecurity, but I'm always about trying to attract new talent. This is a new area. We can pull people in. There's a lot of things that they're doing that are transferable skills to really bring more of more seats in to fill the need. And I also think it's important for us to, like I said earlier, consider the talent that we have and making sure we're offering professional development opportunities. We did definitely do that at Danaher. I'm very happy to say that, and just really encourage other organizations out there to make sure they're kind of capturing that for the talent that we have, because we want to retain that top talent, and then we also want to try to attract the new talent too.
Yeah, and I will say personally, if I had known that cybersecurity and ethical hacking was a thing back in high school, I don't think I ever would have gone into marketing. Now, that being said, if I hadn't have gone into marketing, I might not have the same stance that I currently have on
I agree with
cybersecurity. So it all worked out. But I do think that it is important that people understand the options that they have, and just how vast of a field cybersecurity is. I mean, there's 10, 12 different career paths you can go in just inside of cybersecurity.
absolutely.
All right.
It's
Well, hey,
always
thank
always an exciting day too. It's never
yes.
boring. So if you're looking for something that's never boring, it's cybersecurity.
Yeah, yeah. Particularly when you have an incident. That's definitely not
Oh
boring.
yeah, all hands on deck. That's a fun day.
No. I've had more than one 3 a.m. night. And most of the time we had the information we needed to go home by midnight. We just didn't know it. So, well, hey, thank you so much for joining today. It's been a fabulous episode. Any final words of wisdom before we end the show?
No, I would just encourage to get more information out about how to report phishing attacks. I think that's important for everyone, and to really foster that environment when in doubt. Don't click, but definitely engage the cybersecurity team.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Fishing for Answers.
Thank you.